All right, so we are recording. And just a recap of where we left off last time, pretty much talked about a lot. I think we got the windows involved, we had some stairs involved, we started designing some rooms, and I think we pretty much topped off with the roof. So I do want to continue, and then really lastly, show you how to print or turn this into a PDF document that is already scaled and ready to go. I do want to talk about some of the aspects that we can do to make things look quote unquote pretty, or I even call it kind of Illustrator-esque, if you will. So we definitely want to talk about that, and really just any last remaining things that I can caveat in terms of Revit. The first thing I want to go over is that we can add actually way more detail to this, and in my case I'm going to get a couple of doors so that this starts looking, you know, at least somewhat relevant. We'll get a slider at the top up there, and as you can see, it's pretty live action. As soon as you tap something in, it's pretty much there and in every single view, which is both a blessing and a curse, right? Of course, having everything available in there, but at the same time, once it's there, it's pretty locked into place. You'll have to rehost it somewhere else if you do want to move it to a different wall. But that being the case, we went over a few things more, like, well, if that door is too small or short, of course you can go to Edit Type, and you can make a new one. In my case, what I'd like to do is duplicate it, and very often I even just rename it a slider door. And in my case, maybe I wanted 8 feet by 8 feet. So again, labeling those things goes definitely a long way. But as you can see, I have a pretty short piece here, so I'm going to go with 8 feet wide. And the height of the sliding door, I'm going to make also 8 feet. So again, changing those numbers, pressing OK, and applying. We'll actually apply it to this piece as soon as I press OK. So those things do change, but what is nice now is it did keep the previous one. So if I do actually click on the bottom tab and I go to the other doors and windows, right, it does actually go back to the other one as well. You basically just made a new door. So I wanted to make sure that I fully explain some of the way that Revit is working. In my case, I also wanted to caveat that the rendering abilities of Revit will make your computer crash, especially if you don't have the right drivers installed on the computer, right? That goes without saying. I won't necessarily click on them, but yeah, you'll see that the different rendered views, especially realistic, use with caution. Yeah, it does make a pretty realistic render, arguably, at least for a client, but does crash, especially my computer running on a virtual machine. But in my case, I do want to add some more detail. Maybe I want to get some rafters involved. Maybe you don't even know what a rafter is, but you definitely know that there's beams or structure that are required of architecture. In my case, I need to set actually my work plane. So I'm going to set my work plane, and I'm going to pick a plane myself. Press OK. It's going to say, hey, which plane are you talking about? I'm going to say the bottom, the soffit, if you will, of this roof. And I do want to make and show you your first structural grid system. So if you go to structure, there's actually quite a bit, and you can make things piece by piece, such as a wall, which by the way is different than a regular wall. Literally, it's a structural wall. So when you're trying to load different categories and it goes, hey, you're in the wrong category, and you're like, wait, but I'm loading a wall. It's very easy to get confused in Revit. But again, if you know what you're doing and you understand the different aspects of architecture, then you have absolutely no problem. In our case, I do want to actually make a beam system because I'll be making a series of rafters. And as you can see in the small GIF or animation, essentially I'm making like a floor, but instead of floor, I'll have beam systems. In my case, very interchangeable. Since I set my work plane to the bottom view, right, of that piece, I'm actually going to make it a little easier on myself. And hopefully, well, I can't do that in an edit mode. So I'm actually going to take my section and get it relatively underneath. That's pretty sweet, especially how fast that was, right? But I need to get underneath and get a slightly better view of that. So let's get as close as possible, and let's start to make some rafters. After all, it's already set, so again, let's go back to beam system. And in my case, I'm actually going to select the line, because why work harder when I can just work smarter? Now I can just click on basically the outline of my roof. As you guys remember in last time in part 2, we basically designed this roof to have a certain overhang, and we talked about slopes and everything in between. Now this one actually controls the direction of the beam. I would actually want to control my rafters to be most efficient. If I do it the other way, well, that's not exactly structural. I'll have literally rafters just kind of floating about. So in my case, I'm going to select beam direction and make sure that I'm selecting the right duration or orientation. In the spacing, I'm going to go with 18 inches on center, enter, and I'm going to go ahead and press OK. As you can see, by default, it immediately made all of the structure for you. Yeah, that's right. No more copying and pasting, offsetting, or anything like that, like what we would do in Rhinoceros. I still have a floating one, but as you can see, it starts off pinned, and I can unpin it, so UP, and of course move it as necessary. So don't get me wrong, in a construction situation, it's actually much more like that. Halfway in the wall and halfway out of the wall. Of course, actually ended up being more like a rafter slash fascia board. And of course, holding up that piece. But as you can see, it's definitely looking a little bit more intentional, definitely a little bit more detailed and structural. We could even take it a step further, right? Especially if we were doing some sort of standing seam. Now, I don't often show this part, but we can fake things till we make things. We can take this component, switch to the right view, CC for copy, we went over that last time. Make just a slightly above copy, if you will, and I'll switch that to a sloped glazing. And as you can see, I can do some pretty special stuff, right? As you can see here, let's move it up a little bit so you can see it better. We've got glass. Now I don't necessarily need glass on top of my roof, so I'll take that piece, I'll edit the type, and I'll basically turn it into some mullion systems, because why not? Which leads me maybe to my next piece, that you don't necessarily have to have a slider. We can have open, very open transparent glass. So I do want to show that because it is a different wall type. In our case though, I can control this by its interior grids and its other grids. Yeah, that's right, it has grid 1 and grid 1 mullions. In my case, I'm going to switch just the regular grid to a fixed distance. In my case, I'm going to switch that to 18 inches on center. And grid 2 I don't really need, so I'm going to press OK. And as you can see, I start to get some grid patterns. I'm also going to make sure that the in-between, the glass piece, is essentially none. So in my case, I do want to make sure that whatever it's filled with is basically switched to none. Curtain panel. And instead of none, let's switch that to empty. Another way of saying none, right? Oh, forgot to give it a component. So even though I put it 18 inches on center, I do have to tell it something to be. So in my case, I'm going to go with like a simple rectangle and press OK. So obviously you can use this to model especially very specific things, right? When I want something to line up with another thing, and vice versa. It's starting to actually look a little too thick, so I'm going to bring it down a bit. I think it might be actually floating in the air. It is. So I can place things within another thing, which is kind of nice. But yeah, it's starting to look almost even texturized. So definitely not bad, and definitely useful. The next thing I didn't mention is that we can actually make, we can bring in components like doors or windows, but you can also separate stuff and change it, right? So for instance, I can take this wall and I can split it. So SL for split, and essentially I need to click on that wall somehow. Now, for the most part, it's pretty easy, but as you can see, it only actually registers my split click actually at the extent of the object. So in my case, I'm going to split it here, and I'm going to split it over there. And as you can see, what that does is, well, it split up that wall to be honestly a whole nother piece of that wall. And as you can see, it went all the way down too. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, if I just wanted a slider up here and not necessarily the whole piece, I would actually have to break that down. And let me show you what I mean. So now that this is a separate wall, I can switch it to a different wall type, which is extremely useful. I mean, don't get me wrong, it requires some more planning, but extremely useful. I can switch that to a curtain wall, and suddenly I have like a glass system, right? Maybe a glass fixed window system, which is really cool. However, maybe I actually want this to be some sort of door at the top, not necessarily a fixed window. So I do need to unpin it and delete. And yes, I do need to unpin a lot of items and delete them. However, you'll notice that mullions are controlled by a grid system. If I take that grid system and I move it with my arrows, yeah, you see that those mullions are essentially controlled by the glass piece that it is. And it's essentially a grid system. However, in order to select certain parts of that system, I'm actually hitting tab right now, and as you can see, it's nearly impossible to actually select this piece of glass. Very often in Revit, you'll have to hide something, so HH, literally hide it, so that you can fiddle through and actually click on the damn glass. Don't get me wrong, I'm showing you the secrets, but this took me literally weeks to understand why I can't select this piece of glass. So, not to explain it heavily, but sometimes hide something in order to reveal the outline of another item. In my case, once I have that, I can select it and I can switch it to, say, a solid. Once I select it to a solid, then I can put another door on it. Now, in this case, the door is far too large to put in there, and it won't even register. So I need to pick a smaller door, or pick something that actually makes sense, like a frame door or a glass door. In my case, I do have a glass door for you, and you can add that in. But as you can see, it's struggling trying to get it in there. So it's probably just too tall, and instead of sitting there trying to guess at it, well, I'm just gonna fake it till I make it. Now mine's of course pinned, so it's basically going, whoa bro, you can't move pinned items, are you crazy? Yeah, I am. So in my case, I'm gonna unpin it and of course move it. So that might fix it for us. Again, trying to just show you that you can do very specific and very advanced things, but it's not as simple as just making a wall like it was in Rhino. Now it's literally trying to finish a project, which by the way, we don't do in Studio. There's no such thing as a finished project. In fact, that's why we have feedback reviews, because obviously it's the next steps of the design, which is usually this part, the construction documents. But in my case, it might not be working, and that's okay. So I'm going to switch back to my other view. Sorry, it's pretty hard to see on this screen. So I'm simply just trying to turn off my hidden view. There we go, reset. And let's instead change this wall, if you will. You notice that I did change it into just a solid panel. I'm going to try and switch it to a door. So in my case, I might want to go with empty and see if I can put a door there. As you can see, it's really trying hard not to. Let's go ahead and actually switch my work plane, because that may actually be it too. So I'm going to go back to my work plane and switch it just to a regular level, right? So honestly, any floor plan should be okay. Let's see if that fixes it for us. As you can see, it's very empty, but still technically there's something there, and it is having a pretty hard time. I'm going to go ahead and put the door there first, because sometimes we just need to rehost it to something else. Nope, really doesn't want to go there. Let's figure it out. As you can see, it's pretty hard to select something invisible, so you might have to sit here for a second and find that invisible door. There, oh, you guys see it? It was there. Oh, there it is. So be very careful making something invisible. I'm going to switch it back to a solid and just hope that I can get it on there. Usually it'll take it in as a wall. Actually, my bad. Let's switch it to a wall. Don't choose the other one. My bad. Now a door should absolutely go on there. But as you can see, I may actually need to make a new file type and really dial that in. Today I'm just going to fake it till I make it. So let's move the door slightly. Maybe line up with that mullion. Sweet. And in my case here, I gotta hide that mullion to move the grid. So hide it, unpin it first, hide it, take the grid itself, again unpin it, and now move it. So again, as you can see, Revit is definitely not intuitive. It is not your best friend, right? It does make drawings really well, but when it comes to customization, it is pulling teeth, right? Especially when you're trying to dial in something ever so perfectly, right? However, there's a small summary of at least how you would attempt to do that. You can also add your own grids and delete grids for that matter. But again, maybe for another tutorial. If I wanted to look that up, I'd maybe just type in Revit and curtain wall systems and everything about them. So that would definitely be something I write down for today. However, the majority of what really I wanted to talk about this video is not so much the modeling. That's really all the modeling that I quote unquote really want you to tackle here, right? I don't want you to necessarily start making curvilinear surfaces. Don't get me wrong. You might be very excited to, and Revit does just magically pop them out, but good luck, you know, of course, making it look good. Even I'm adding a diagonal and it's already looking like trash, but that's just me. But let's say I was finished modeling, I got all my furniture, I got labels, I got dimensions, and I really figured out all those other things. So as you guys know, we set all those things up here, and to be fair, I haven't even gone over annotation, where you're gonna find your best friend. You know, you can actually label rooms. The text is really cool. If you set it to a meter, you can immediately click on something and point it out. And I gotta tell you, it's a game changer when you're writing 500 different things. 500 different things. But it can be pretty sweet that all of these are essentially connected, and you know, you can really call out things very nicely. It's very simple to make a diagram, and you know, if Illustrator, the people at Adobe Illustrator are listening, they really need to get on board with something like this, because that would be awesome to have, just these text components. Anyway, what's even more awesome about it is you can add more arrows to them, right? I mean, it can get pretty sweet in terms of components and really explaining a drawing. Again, something that you don't do until a construction document. So anyway, not trying to get too excited, but in our case, we do need to make some sheets and we need to get it ready for our final printout, right? In our case, I do want to make sure that it's always at a fine level, and of course already at the right scale. So in my case, of course, at a 1/4 scale. You'll see immediately I have a lot of space that isn't going to fit on the paper. In fact, if you go to floor plan and you drag these on there, you'll see immediately not everything's going to fit. And in fact, you may actually realize you could fit multiple plan views on a single sheet at 1/4 scale. So the first thing I want to do is double click on the viewport itself. I want to use the crop tool. I need to first show the crop tool. I know I didn't make this program, guys, I apologize. But you need to first show the crop tool, dial it in. So in my case, get it pretty darn close. I don't necessarily need all of the topography. After all, I am required of a site plan. I'll take that piece and voila. You'll notice you can't move anything though. You'll have to double click on the outside and move the viewport. Again, I did not make this program. I'll change the viewport style to, say, I don't know, EH viewport. And it's got to be somewhere. Remember what the funkiness I showed you about this? You can move it here first, but in order to change this line, you have to click on the viewport and change the line. Again, I did not make this program. Let's get maybe another floor plan in there. So I'll take the first floor plan, if you will. Sweet. Again, same process. Take that crop tool. And again, if you don't see the crop tool, make sure the crop tool is enabled. And definitely not too shabby there. However, you may be thinking to yourself, well, if you're in Cornoto's class, you're like, this is perfect. This is all black and white, just the way he likes it. But if you're in Veret's class, or Boguslav's class, or any of the older professors, we appreciate definitely a level of poche and line weight, which, by the way, is not your best friend in Revit. It kind of has its automatic line weight. So for instance, if you type in TL, which stands for thin line, you may notice that if you can actually toggle between thin line and what it actually looks like in the print. So this is the line weight that would pop up when we print it. Now, if you're used to AutoCAD, that's essentially the way it'll look in an AutoCAD look. Now, what I'm actually clicking on is TL for, again, thin line. But it is really nice to see that there is an automatic line weight, but for some of us, we want a little bit more or a little bit less. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is an inverted relationship. Right now, it's showing the lines as white. They're not going to print white. They're going to print black, and the black background is going to print white. It can look very good like this, and definitely easier on the eyes, but printing it out may be a very different situation. It may look, of course, very different. So I'm not necessarily going to get into line weight. We'll stick with the default on that one, but if you did want to change the line weight, you can go to Manage, and again, line weights. It looks like it moved around a little bit. It should be under Manage, maybe more options actually now. Let me find it real quick. As you can see, finding stuff is hilarious. You'll sit here forever. It's not in design options, I'll tell you that much. That is a tricky system. I'm pretty sure, oh, no, it's usually it says more options. Ooh, we'll have to find it, but in our case, I won't waste any time. I was pretty sure it was in the same spot, but you know, they definitely do move some things around. It might be actually in view now. Let's see. Yeah, thin lines. Well, that's the command that I've been using, thin lines. So there is actually a button for it. But there is a way to change all of it. And as you can see, it's not like something that you change all the time, right? I mean, once you establish your line weights for a firm, I mean, they're not going to change it, obviously, every single project. But again, I'll let you know when I do find that. However, something that does change all the time is what's known as the visual graphics. And keep in mind that this has to be changed per viewport, but then you can apply the same copy to each viewport. So if I do one for floor plans, I can copy it to all my floor plans. If I do one for sections, I can essentially do it to all the sections. In my case, I want to get a couple more of these on the board. So we'll get some section views on there. Obviously, we want to switch that to fine. We want to switch that, I don't know, if it's definitely a section, I may even go like 1/2 section. That way you can really see how big it is. And as you can see, I can turn a multitude of things on and off. So if you don't like that border around it, like myself, you don't necessarily have to keep it there. But let's finish up there and get that on the board. Because as of right now, it just kind of defaults to a certain line weight and a certain poche level. So you can mess around with the visual graphics. So let's talk about that. You need to be actually in the viewport, so double click. And to type in VG stands for visual graphics. To be completely honest with you, I don't know where the visual graphics button is, but I imagine it's probably in annotations or in the manage tab. Don't quote me on that one. But VG will also bring it up, and keep in mind that this box looks the same for every viewport. Very, very confusing sometimes. But as you can see, it has a list of literally every single component in the project, down to the wires, down to the walls, and down to the topsoil. In our case, just for the sake of tutorial, I only want to add a cut pattern to a certain number of categories. I definitely want to add it to topography. I definitely want to add it to the walls, but I don't want everything in between. So I'm going to hold Command, or sorry, Option. I forgot that's the Windows button on mine. And actually select the few that I do want to cut through. In my case, I want to cut through the windows, the walls, any structural components. So I definitely want to cut through the site. I need to cut through the topography. So I need to make sure my topography. I want to cut through stairs. I want to cut through signage. I don't really need to cut through rooms right now, but roofs eventually. Ramps, plumbing, and as you can see, you need to know a lot about the piece that you're working on. Furniture, floors, definitely want to cut through those things. To be fair, you probably could just highlight everything, but to be fair, you wouldn't do that in a normal situation, so best not to teach you how to do something wrong. But we'll press OK here, or sorry, before we press OK, we'll click on Override the pattern of the cut. This is also where you can change the line weight as well, very specifically to the category. But we'll click Override, and we'll switch the background or foreground, honestly doesn't matter, to a solid fill. And I don't know, I'm feeling spunky today. I'm going to go with like a UT orange, like a burnt orange going on there. I like that. and press OK. Now what's nice is that it applied it to every single one. I'll press OK, and voila, we have color. But as you can see, it is not quite the Illustrator tool. I didn't have to necessarily export anything. I can't necessarily just suddenly make a gradient either. It's pretty locked in. And as you can see, yes, I do have to do that all over again or save the viewport. So if I double click on that viewport, I can actually save it in my view templates, right? Right now it's set to none. So if I save that, I can actually apply it again, right? So in my case, I should be able to make a new view. I'm not sure why. Oh, there we go. We'll make a new one, and we'll call it New Settings Floor Plan. We can copy those ones, so apply. Well, in my case, I messed up. I accidentally pressed apply. So make sure you don't apply over the settings that you want. But as you can see, you save it and of course apply it to a new one. In section, we can kind of do the same thing, but we can't just apply a floor plan one to a section one. So I literally have to go back to my sections and honestly do the exact same thing again. And as you can see, both great and terrible at the same time. Now, let's say I didn't want to do all that. It was going to take way too much time, and I love Illustrator or Photoshop and want to apply that to there. Well, I can export as a DWG, or honestly a lot of different things in between. Well, I'll talk about that when I get to printing. I forgot the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the perspective view as well. So if you go to that 3D view, did I talk about perspectives? I can't remember if I did. I don't think I did. But perspectives are definitely a lot different in Revit. In fact, you'll actually have to click on the View tab. You'll find a camera, so if you go to the View tab, you can walk through it, by the way. You can make an entire video of yourself walking through your objects. But there's also the camera. Now, what's nice about the camera is once you click, and in my case, it's having a hard time, we'll click out and basically look out. And as you can see, it doesn't crop everything. But for the most part, we can uncrop that and we can get a pretty nice virtual view. Now right now it's still kind of in a black and white kind of grid form. So I'm going to switch that to a shaded view. And more or less we start to get a very quasi simple rendering, right, to say the least. Let's maybe try and go for a better shot here. But as you can see, it's that exact same cone that we're used to in Rhino, right? And really shows the extent of what it's looking at, and we can actually control still what is being looked at, such as looking up or looking down, which is pretty visually interesting to say the very least. So anyway, just to make sure that we cover some of those things, I'm going to go back to my first floor plan, or second floor plan, I can't remember. There we go. Let's get another view involved. Camera. Let's get those stairs. Those are looking pretty sweet. Not too shabby. Look at that. We get kind of a wide angle lens view. But we do need some and potentially some for this project. And as you can see, as soon as I start moving around, it definitely dials it in. We'll go to a shaded view, and definitely not too shabby there. Not gonna lie, that's pretty sweet. Something we're pretty used to in Rhino. But if I did want to put this in Rhino, first I do need to put it actually on my sheets. Funny enough, it is a little easier that way. So I take that three-dimensional view and quite literally drag it on, right? However, the way that we print and export in this program is far different than Rhinoceros. So I do want to end it for today and really hopefully actually get to the part of all the other things that I think I'm missing. I don't know, it's so hard to do a Revit tutorial, let me tell you, because there's just so much crap involved. Anyway, to get back on track, obviously let's get some interior views, let's get some exterior views, that way we can at least pertain to the project. And yeah, I mean, it's honestly built the same way. You'd go out into the middle of nowhere, or obviously select another view. You can turn off that crop, right? That way you can see a little bit better. And maybe we look at it from way in the distance and really take a look at it. And definitely not too bad. But let's say that view is pretty good, and maybe I want to dial that in just a little bit, because potentially that would be one that I definitely make my own in Photoshop. Doesn't necessarily matter if it's wired or shaded view. It is going to produce the same DWG drawing. But yeah, definitely not too shabby. And what's great is you can still actually move stuff around in these views, but I don't recommend it. But stuff like a window, like shoot, just dial it in, right? Get some of those things, of course, on point. I think you can actually copy stuff too. Good luck though, as you can see, because you don't want to mess up the view. Anyway, it's kind of like an automatic saved view though, right? Definitely not too shabby there. But let's get some of those views on board. Well, not that view. That view sucks. And brings me to my next problem. If you run into something like this where you're like, man, why is this so small? That's because, well, it's trying to stick to a scale, right? Revit tries to keep everything in a parametric way. But in our case, you can't really scale a perspective view. So it's based off of the cone of vision, which technically this one's a bigger cone of vision than this one. So often interior shots look pretty big. But if you do want to make this a little bit bigger, go to crop size after selecting it. And go with some sort of, instead of field of view, go with either some sort of scale and change it, or you can actually change the width of the crop size itself. So for instance, like 12 inches, pretty sure that one, it used to be automatic. There we go. Yeah, if you want to scale it, you can scale it. So you can definitely make that a little bit bigger. And it's meaning 12 inches to the page. So if you want that literally to be 14, gosh, again, I hope Illustrator's listening, because that would be a very useful tool for Illustrator to have. But let's say I was done. I've got my floor plans, I got my sections going. I'm going to take a look at all my sheets. So I like to close all my tabs except one. That way it keeps, obviously, the project open. And click on all my sheets. Make sure they look good. Obviously, I need my second floor plan. I need my roof plan, my elevations, which, by the way, we already have. We just need to drag those on, right? And obviously fix the viewports, as you can see. But I still need to fix those. And you may actually run into something like this where it's showing like half the building and not showing the other half. Double click on that viewport and change your far clip. What is a far clip? I have no time to explain, but let's switch to 100 feet. And obviously clip that a little bit farther, showing the rest of the building. Anyway, you're gonna run into a lot of stuff you don't know, but that's okay. We're gonna learn as we go. But let's say I have all my sheets, they were looking good. Got my sections, my perspectives, my site plan. Everything is just ready and good to go. I double clicked on my project and I changed it to, final project. Again, stuff that we can actually change. If you can't change it, you'll have to actually change it in the piece and of course load it in. You'll have to refer to project 1 or part 1 for a little bit more of that explanation. But again, when in doubt, guys, every single component in Revit has an actual name. So when in doubt, take the name and type that in YouTube or a Google search or an online form. And yeah, it may take a 20-minute tutorial, but ChatGPT is pretty good at it too. However, be very careful. Suddenly it goes into a code mode and it suddenly tries to get you to code stuff. Revit is actually a code-based program, and I don't recommend writing the code for Revit unless you really know what you're doing. So anyway, just be aware of that ChatGPT sometimes goes a little too far advanced into problem solving. But let's say I do need to print. I do want to show you one of my favorite tools of all time, and it's called Qt PDF Writer. So if you go to a new tab and you type in literally Qt as in, what do you call it? Hello Kitty is cute. Qt PDF Writer. And yeah, definitely download. But in our case, it is completely free. And Hopefully it'll stay that way forever. You'll want to download that free Qt PDF writer, and it's really awesome because it's essentially a virtual printer, which is really great, especially if you don't have Adobe Acrobat and you need to make a PDF. And by the way, it works on every Windows program. So definitely a plus. Now, to be honest, I don't know if I have it installed yet. So I don't. So let's go over the installation. We'll go to free download. In my case, I'll just put it on the desktop. The desktop. Where the hell's my desktop? There it is. Save. And it should be fairly quick. Installed pretty much just about like any other program. Wow, who knew it could take this long to download 7 megabytes in 2025? Now don't get me wrong, that's about really great internet in like 2005. But come on, man, it's been 20 years. All right, Qt PDF Writer, we'll double click on it. We'll press yes. And oh no, we have a virus. No, I'm just kidding. Clearly, nobody else paying attention. Oh, it looks like I already do have it, so my bad. If that's the case, obviously it's a pretty simple installation. Make sure you uncheck some of those boxes so you don't get like random emails, because that's how it's free, right? Remember, in the world of technology, guys, if a product or app is free, you are the product. Just be aware. Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. Anyway. But just to get into it, it looks like I already have it installed. So let's go over the printing process, and really more or less probably the last step for most of us. So before I do the print process, I do want to show you how to export it as a DWG, just in case you want to edit in Photoshop or edit it in Illustrator, because you can. So in our case, we can export it, and as you can see, you can export in a few things, but CAD formats is definitely the one that we want. And to be fair, it will open a DXF, but not exactly friendly. Now, if you were taking it back into Rhino, I would probably go with a DXF over a DWG. But I'd go with a DWG, especially for Illustrator. So in my case, I'd want to select more than just the sheet that I'm on. So if I do want to do that, I can of course make a new set. So when I make that set, I can actually select all my sheets. And I don't have to export or save one at a time, which, by the way, you know, young Professor Verrett was definitely doing that like a complete loser. Sitting there exporting every single file when I could have just done it once. Anyway, time is money, right? But let's make sure we got all of our sheets. In my case, yeah, you could do the viewports as well, but it does start to not bound it, and it is kind of a hassle. But in my case, I'm going to select next. Make sure that it's a DWG. I'm going to go with the lowest here, just like I would in Rhinoceros. And export views on sheets and adding the external links. That's definitely necessary. We'll go ahead and put that on our desktop and press OK. And it's literally going to export every single DWG. In fact, if we take a look at my desktop, it's probably filling up with random files. I probably should have put this in its own folder. And as you can see, it's going to take a minute or two. But once it's done, you'll see that you've added a bunch of DWGs to your desktop. So again, be very careful. This is all those, by the way. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that real quick so I don't have a heart attack. My OCD is clearly flaring up. I do not understand how some professors do it. Like, have you ever seen Escamilla's desktop? Not to throw Escamilla under the bus, but literally you cannot see the background. It's just like literally all. I don't know how people do that. I would literally freak out. But anyway, as you can see, they definitely populate, and you definitely start to have every single piece, if you will, of your DWGs, and you can open those up in Illustrator. And that's pretty useful, to say the very least. Especially if you don't really want to start messing with the visual graphics of Revit, and I don't blame you. It's honestly very difficult, time consuming, and you probably have some other things to get done. The last thing though is of course printing. So let's go ahead and show you how to print. Very simple. We'll go to print, but instead of selecting a printer, we'll literally select Qt PDF Writer. So in my case, instead of my HP that I have at home, I'll select Cube PDF Writer. And the reason why it's so great is because it's super customizable and, again, free. Well, besides the ads that they'll send you through your email. But at least in terms of the properties, we can select the paper size and go to Advanced. And awesomely enough, it has like every paper size available, including architecture paper. And in our case, you'll select an Arc D, which is a 24 by 36. We'll select that paper size and press OK. We'll select color and definitely make sure that it's in some sort of landscape format. We'll go ahead and press OK. Secondly, we'll need to change the settings of the whole. So in my case, I'll select Setup. I don't really have to change anything there, but I do need to verify that that's Arc D, on center, and at 100%. Make sure that it's not fit to page. It's very easy to accidentally ruin the scale of your drawing by simply selecting fit to page. And I don't blame you. In most cases, some teachers even default to say fit to page just to kind of fake it till you make it. But again, Revit is not about faking anything. This is the part where you do make it. Revit, the construction documents, right? So no faking it here. We do need it at 100% and at the correct scale. So in our case, we'll press OK. But before we do that, we'll set OK to this setting. Before we press print, we'll select actually all the different prints that we want. So in my case, I already set up that set of set 1, and it already has all my sheets on it. So in my case, I'll select that one. You can also select the current window. And last but not least, we want to combine these multiple pieces into one file, right? So create separate files. I don't want separate files. I want one all together. But just in case I did want separate files, I could do that. In my case, it's going to bring up this window and save it anyway, so I'm not too worried there. And once I press OK, then it'll actually start the process. You have chosen to print 9 view sheets as separate files. Do you want to continue? Yes. So don't get me wrong, it's going to pop up 9 times those 9 PDFs, right? Now, it's going to sit there and it's going to pop them out for us, but this should pop up 9 times, and I should be able to save it essentially in 9 places, but in my case, I'll just save it to the desktop. So save, and it should pop up again. Each sheet is going to pop out. Now, if you do combine, it'll put it all into one sheet, which is great, but not great for Miro. Because if I do one PDF in Miro, it actually flips through it in Miro. So, I mean, you can do it that way, but it's very easy to accidentally, not have all 9 sheets. But as you can see, once you press OK, it cannot be stopped. And they're actually going pretty fast. Usually, especially the one with the most stuff on it, which is like a render, definitely will have and take the longest for the PDF writer to write. But once it's done with this, and again, I probably should have just clicked combine, but it would have taken about 9 minutes to print, right? So we would have just sat here instead of clicking on some stuff. We would have just sat here and clicked on one thing. But again, it's up to you. Hang in there. Looks like we're done. Should have counted, but yeah, there's all the PDFs. And if you double click on that PDF, it comes in at true scale. But voila, we have the true PDF. And what's nice about that is it's the actual scale too. So if you zoom in, you'll see that, well, I'm kind of zooming in fakely with my trackpad, but if you actually zoom in, it's a very high quality, just like a vector image from Illustrator. So again, it's a very vectorized program. But last but not least, we just need to hit save and call it a day. So again, just to recap, right? We went over a little bit more modeling tools of especially rafters and other details. We went slightly over the curtain wall system and how complex that can be. We went over the visual graphics components, right? And VG. We went over SL for split. We went over doors, windows, and a couple of other things at the same time. We also went over printing and exporting. So again, before we end the last Revit tutorial for the semester, part 3, Are there any questions that you want me to do that you may particularly want to do for your final project, but I haven't really covered yet? Going once. Going twice. No other questions, guys?
Any, I guess insight for if I'm trying to make two intersecting A-frame?
Ooh. Two intersecting A-frames?
Yeah. Just one big one and then just one kind of just.
I would probably just model it yourself. Are you actually making the structure?
Yeah.
And everything? Because it actually has a lot of loaded pre-structure beams.
Oh, really?
Right. So instead of, and that's a good question. So the question that Brandon had was, how can I basically get two A-frames to talk to each other or combine a little bit better? You could actually model that yourself in Rhino and bring it in too. But it would actually have to be the exact scale. So one thing I can do is export my 3D view as a DWG. I can take that in a Rhino, model it, take just that piece, and put it back into my Revit file. Don't get me wrong, it is a little bit more advanced in order to do so. Another way that you can do it is kind of fake it using not only the structural beam system, but just loading in certain beams themselves. You'll see that when you load in a beam, you can actually load in an entire truss system as well. I don't actually have any loaded, but if you go to actually BIM object, you probably should be able to find some structural components. So BIM object. And to be fair, the official ones are actually the Revit structural downloads, but you'll need to actually load that library in. So if you remember in part 1, I actually showed like the materials library and that you have to install 15.9 gigs worth of stuff that I can't necessarily do for these tutorials.
Yeah.
So there is a structural file on that one too. So don't get me wrong, your question is really outside the bounds of honestly even what I want you to do for this project. But appreciate the level of clarity, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a very hyper advanced question, but at the same time, it can technically be done in Revit. I would actually go with the more manual way, model it myself and bring it in. However, there are some very special components out there that exist that literally manufacturers make in order to make these things easier. So definitely a good question. Any others questions, guys? We'll leave it there. Oh, sorry, Guadalupe, got a question.
So I have a question is, when you create the second floor on section, is there a way to kind of like create it also kind of like, you know how on commands you can click first floor or like floor plan? Is there a way to also create it for the second floor?
Yeah.
Or how does that work?
We definitely covered that in part 2, but
Nice.
the question was, is there a way to make another viewport or view like what we did here, right? How mine says second floor, floor plan, and don't get me wrong, you can always change these, by the way. I should make that more correct. But in our case, to answer your question, Guadalupe, we'd go to view, we'd go to plan views, floor plan, and then we would actually select the ones available. If you don't see the one that you're looking for, it's because it's not actually there yet. So you would actually go to elevation or section view, and you would make sure to draw in your grid lines. So you could go to the architecture, the level line, and when you draw a new level, it should create essentially a new plan. Now, it doesn't create a new plan here until, again, I go to view, plan, floor plan, and of course now have that level 16 in there. Great question. But yeah, we did cover that in part 2, but there it is again. Any other questions, guys? We'll leave it at that for today.